Welcome to the holiday edition of Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and today we're honored to have Abiola Afolayan, who is the attorney and founder of the Not On Our Watch advocacy organization, which is actually a non-governmental organization that is focused on eradicating human trafficking internationally and nationally. Very, very honorable work, Abiola. Welcome.
Hi, Walla. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and congratulations on a wonderful show. I am a fan.
Well, we thank you. We have a great team and we provide great information as you are today. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. So Not On Our Watch Advocacy is a non-governmental organization focused on fighting youth trafficking domestically as well as internationally. We're based here in Washington, D.C., or in the D.C. area, if you will. And our strategy is through awareness, action, and using data to drive discourse. And so what I mean when I say that is making sure that, we're spreading the gospel, if you will, making sure that people are aware of the fact that there's human trafficking happening domestically as well as internationally, and then driving people through action, to act and try to make a difference, and then using data, because we think that data is a very, very important aspect of making a difference in fighting any social policy issues in our communities.
Well, let's quickly talk about, you said you're focused on getting the word out there. Now, human trafficking is something that's been slowly getting out there. People really don't know. They think it's an international issue. They're not sure it's a national issue, especially in the United States. So how are you getting the word out? What are you doing to get the word out?
Well, so we're here on your show, so we're getting the word out, obviously. And you're right, people tend to think that human trafficking is a global South phenomena, if you will. It's happening somewhere in Asia or Africa, in third world countries and what have you. So, we're talking to, organizations and groups such as, your show, if you will. And then one of the initiatives, that we focused on is the Super Bowl campaign. So to be clear, we're not suggesting that the Super Bowl is an event where human trafficking happens. But we think that using the Super Bowl as a platform to educate the American population is I think, a very smart move, on the part of anyone that's trying to combat a social policy issue, given the fact that according to ESPN, over 111 million people, I think, watched the Super Bowl in, what was it, in 2012 or 2013? That's quite a lot of people,
A lot of people.
And I know that even though I'm not really a sports fan.
But you love the Super Bowl, right?
I love the Super Bowl because it lets me promote my work, and also I always find myself at some sort of Super Bowl party. So inevitably, I always end up, watching some part of the Super Bowl, and the halftime shows are, a big deal, and so on. So, so one of our initiatives that we had earlier in 2014 is that we had the Super Bowl campaign where we coupled with the Attorney General's office in New Jersey, which is where they had the last Super Bowl, and we had a public service announcement video where we had, law enforcement, community leaders, we had youth, and then we had Leah Albright Bird, who's a youth sex trafficking survivor advocate. Leah is doing amazing work out there as far as bringing awareness around the issue of domestic human trafficking, and so she was our spokesperson, and the PSA was extremely successful in our opinion because the Attorney General's office ended up having it aired on local New Jersey television. And so in our eyes, our goal was met because people, at least in New Jersey where the Super Bowl was happening, got to see the public service announcement video. And your audience can check it out on our website at notonourwatchadvocacy.org. So that's just one of the examples of our awareness initiatives. Most recently in June, actually in July, we were approached by the DC Youth Advisory Council's office in Washington, D.C., and they have a group of young people who are leaders in their community, and they basically convene those young people with the eye towards giving them the leadership skills that they would need just to function in life in general. So what we did was we piloted our youth boot camp, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a youth boot camp where the population that we're focusing on are actually empowered, because I go to a lot of anti-trafficking events, and what I see is a bunch of adults discussing the issue, and what I see missing are, the young people who are being affected.
And talk a little bit about that. What's the target age for trafficking?
According to FBI reports, the age that someone is usually sort of into the life or affected by the life, if you will, is around 12 years old, which is really scary. And in fact, FBI reports say that 100 to 300,000 young people are at risk of being trafficked domestically here in the US. So, back to the Youth Advisory Council bootcamp that we did, in light of these numbers, part of what we did was we presented the issue of human trafficking to the young people, and we solicited, what would be the solutions? Because really, at the end of the day, they know what the issues are. They know that, I'm walking to my class and I see something weird, so what would be your natural reaction? What do you think will resonate with your peers, if you will? So that pilot was extremely successful. And so that's part of some of the awareness work that, we've been doing.
And just so that we can make those that are viewing this aware, how do the perpetrators get to the victims? What are some of the ways from the data that you've seen?
Right, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. So the International Labor Organization, for instance, says that over 27 million people have been trafficked, which is like really, really scary. And then the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes just put out a report this year, and basically they said that the number of people who are trafficked has increased, and it's specifically been so with young people. So 33% of trafficked people are actually young people. And domestically here in the US, the profile of a trafficker is actually, it's not what you would expect, right? So, typically when you think about human trafficking, people are thinking about pimping and what have you, the guy with the feathered hat and so on. But the face of the trafficker is really, really changing. What we do know is a quality that traffickers have is the fact that they prey, they're opportunists, if you will. They see a young person who is, and it may not even be, a young person, because, adults also are trafficked, who is really desperate, or who has that sort of hole in their life. And, perpetrators, opportunists tend to be able to sort of spot that and feed on that. So, one story that I can tell you is the story of Evelyn Chumbo, who is, a young woman who was trafficked from Cameroon here to Maryland, right? One of the things that she was told was that she would have a better life in America. And so with that understanding, she'll be able to go to school, she'll be able to have a good life. Her parents said, fine, we'll send you to go, live in America. And so, and that goes to the definition of, human trafficking, right? So there's the act, there's the means and the purpose, right? So the act was her being transferred from Cameroon here. The means was through deception, right? So they lied to her that she was going to have a better life. And the purpose when she got here was that she was enslaved, she was a forced labor. So, so that's one example. The other example is, even a young person could traffic another young person, right? If they're working for an adult who they are under their control. So like the data on human trafficking, the definition of a pimp or, a trafficker is an evolving definition that, to be frank with you, to be honest with you, those of us in the work have not really been able to put our finger on. But one thing that we know for sure is that these people are opportunists, and they really just feed on whatever holes, whether it's like an economic hole, whether it's that it's just a teenager who's going through, stuff that teenagers go through. But for some reason, they're able to spot that weakness in the human being, and then they're able to use it to their advantage, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about some of the work that you've done in the United States. What's going on in the United States?
Well, there's a lot going on. The fight is nonstop. First and foremost, I want to sort of give kudos to a lot of, local, state, and federal leaders. Congresswoman Karen Bass is an amazing congresswoman from California who's really been able to, among other things, build consensus around this issue. It's kind of a no-brainer issue in the sense that no one condones human trafficking, But I think that to be able to bring folks from both sections of the aisle together to pass legislation, to get support for legislation on the federal level is a great thing. And I think that, I think it's worth that people be aware of the amazing work that Karen Bass is doing. She's very passionate about youth issues. And she was able to link the fact that, foster youth are very, very vulnerable to be trafficked. So going back to your question of what's the profile of a trafficker could even be the adult that the foster youth is living with, right? Because sometimes, young people are in situations where even though they may be foster youth, but they're being taken advantage of by folks who are supposed to be taking care of them. I think that, if we look at Polaris's project had a new report out. They usually put out a report every year on sort of where states fare when it comes to addressing the issue of human trafficking. So in Maryland, in Virginia, you all were, we were deemed tier 1 states in the trafficking world. What that means is that, Maryland and Virginia have really worked hard to pass various legislation that protects people who are being trafficked.
And also, can you talk a little bit about those legislation?
Well, I can't speak to specific legislation specifically. What I do know is that there's a lot of different pieces. So one piece of legislation, I think, for instance, in Maryland is sort of the safe harbor laws where, people who've been trafficked have some sort of protection. I think in DC also they passed, or they're working on passing a piece of legislation that addresses how records of folks who've been trafficked are expunged, because one of the issues that folks who have been trafficked face is that they're prostituted at some people call it prostitution, what have you, but they also get records. So, law enforcement is catching up on the fact that if you are forced against your will to engage in sexual activity, if you will, you shouldn't have a record. Yeah. You know what I mean? You shouldn't have a record, which then will make it hard for you when you become an adult to be able to, live a normal life. And what it does is it causes people to go back to that life, if you will, because if you turn 21 and you're not able to work, human nature, you tend to go back to, the life that you knew. So one of the commendable works that I think they're doing in DC is to, pass those laws that help so that, they don't have that record sort of haloing over their head, if you will.
And is there any, in the DC area, the Maryland area, are there any organizations focused on getting the victims back into the regular everyday environment?
There are. So I know that Amara Legal Center, which is run by a young lawyer named Stacey Reamer, basically work on helping trafficked victims get their records expunged, if you will. I also know that Fair Girls, that's based, I believe Fair Girls is based in DC, Maryland, let's just say DC, Maryland area. They're doing amazing work when it comes to curriculum and awareness and education and just like really reaching out to victims. So with the eye towards empowering them. And then of course our organization, we focus on youth specifically because we think that they are a very vulnerable population. And so our strategy is really to educate the youth, because we think that education is a very, very powerful tool. It's almost like sex education. Once your parents have had that conversation with you, when you're faced with the facts, among your peers, you're somewhat better prepared than your peers, that haven't had that conversation. And so that's why we think it's important to reach out to the young people, before they're faced with the issue.
So talk a little bit more about what's going on in the U.S. You mentioned something about Atlanta.
Right. So, so the Carter Center put out a report, I think, earlier this year.
And tell us a little bit. What's the Carter Center?
Oh, so President Jimmy Carter has an amazing center in Atlanta, Georgia, that does amazing work when it comes to gathering data, among other things, gathering data when it comes to human rights issues. So the issue of human trafficking is a human rights issue from an international law perspective. So they put out a report, essentially, stating that Atlanta is like the #1 location for sex trafficking, which is like really scary.
Why?
I think that, when you have big cities, if you will, that's a hotbed naturally. So Atlanta, Houston, Washington, D.C., and so on, it's a hotbed for perpetrators who would want to take advantage of young people as well as adults, and traffic them. And so the Carter Center also said that, according to the report, 100 to 200 young people are actually sex trafficked every day. I mean, when I read that data, like my jaw dropped. I mean, I went to law school because I didn't like math. But, what I found is that data, is a very, very important aspect of any work that you're doing, And when we really just sort of step back and look at these numbers, it's it's mind-blowing. It really is, if you think about it.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. Well, talk about what is going on. You've done work in Nigeria, so talk about that.
Right, so, so the countries that we focus on are, the US, the Republic of South Sudan, Nigeria, and the Gabonese Republic.
Okay. Well, you know what? We're actually going to take a short break for now. We're going to come back and we're going to go into your work in Nigeria and Gabon. So please stay with us.
The power of one small action, one conversation, or one phone call can make a difference in the life of a veteran going through a difficult time. For free 24/7 confidential support, call the Veterans Crisis Line or the Military Crisis Line.
Welcome back to the holiday edition of Chat with the Lawyer. I'm here with Abiola Afolayan, and we've been discussing human trafficking and the work of her non-governmental organization, Not On Our Watch Advocacy. So let's jump back into it. We were talking about Nigeria before we closed. So tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in Nigeria.
Sure. So, I am 1.5 generation Nigerian. What that means is I was here when I was a baby and then went back and then came here. So a lot of the things that are happening as it relates to Boko Haram and some of the northern parts of the country that they're referencing, I have sort of, my dad was my dad was a veterinary doctor, and so we lived in the north, if you will. So we lived in Kano, Kaduna, Abuja. So, these things are not these places are not theories in my mind. They're places that, I've actually been to. So as it relates to Nigeria, the issue is complex, no doubt. So first and foremost, Nigeria has an agency that focuses on fighting human trafficking. It's called NAPTIP. And it's like the agency to eradicate trafficking in persons, if you will. And I find it ironic that that agency exists, but then we have the issue of young girls being kidnapped by Boko Haram.
And now, is Boko Haram considered human trafficking based on the fact that it might be something of a religious protest?
I think that's interesting that you say that. So Boko Haram is, has been deemed by the U.S. as a terrorist organization based in northern Nigeria, and so Boko Haram have their grievances against the Nigerian government, and they've been using human beings as pawns to essentially get their grievances heard, if you will, before the Nigerian government. And so one of their strategies has been, bombings and most recently kidnapping, the young girls that we all are aware of through the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. And so, even though their motivations seem to be religious, if you will, the bottom line is that, based on the trafficking protocol's definition of human trafficking, there was the act, there was the means, there's the purpose, right? So the purpose in this instance sounds interesting because, within other trafficking contexts, the purpose is usually monetarily driven, if you will. But in this instance, the purpose is political, if you will, which really isn't an interesting dynamic because part of the things that we look at, at my organization is sort of the political, social, economic, and cultural impacts of human trafficking and youth trafficking, not only on the countries of origin, but also on the destination countries, where trafficking occurs. So as it relates to, back to your question about what we're doing in Nigeria, a lot of what we're doing is really the issue of awareness, bringing to the attention of people the fact that, human trafficking is very real. We're also sort of holding the Nigerian government's feet to the fire by highlighting the fact that there's an agency that exists in Nigeria that focuses on the issue of human trafficking, which is interesting because, again, what is this agency doing? And I'm not calling this agency out. I'm not casting aspersions on the work that they're doing.
Gotta call them out.
But I just find that interesting, right? And then there's also, as much as I will hold people's feet to the fire, I will also give credit where credit is due. So the agency just put out a report that basically covered up until, I believe, June of 2014, and their data was was an accurate reflection of sort of what's happening in Nigeria with regards to the trafficking of people. So 35% of the trafficking that happened in Nigeria were actually documented to be in the northern part of Nigeria. So their data matches what we're seeing in reality because a lot of the human trafficking that we see on television as it relates to the girls or just in general happen in the northern part of Nigeria. So, so that's that's part of what we're doing in Nigeria, which is really bringing to fore the data, the agencies that exist, but also bringing awareness around the fact that it's important that the Nigerian government really think about whether or not, for instance, the elections that we have coming up in 2015 is something that we need to embark on. You know, what we do, where we place our time really reflects our values, if you will. And, you know, should we be having an election in 2015 when over 200 girls are missing and still haven't been accounted for? Do we need a transitional government that will really sort of bring together the parties so that the grievances of all parties involved are in some way addressed so that we're able to move forward to peace? And this shows you sort of the political dynamic of human trafficking, right? How this single issue can really sort of cut across, you know, economics, political, social, and cultural. So that's the work we're doing. So our work in Nigeria is mostly focused on awareness. We're also really trying to pull the data because the NAPTIP data that came out in 2014, in my opinion, wasn't as robust as it should be, given the fact that they are charged with addressing the issue of human trafficking. Their sampling was, in my opinion, extremely small, given the fact that this is what they were existing to do. You know, this is why they were created. So I, you know, would like to see the, you know, NAPTIP do a more robust analysis of, you know, the numbers out there as it relates to human trafficking in general and child trafficking specifically.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's go into Gabon. What's going on there?
So Gabon is a very interesting country because it's the regional giant of the Central African region. Right now, Gabon, they hold the chairmanship of the Human Rights Council, which is like the UN body that hears human rights issues, if you will. So they're in a position of power when it comes to addressing human rights issues. Another thing that you should you know, note about Gabon is that they have a very, very robust Child Act on the books, which means that their laws actually really, really protect young people. But for some reason, notwithstanding all of that, Gabon has been deemed as the El Dorado of that region. So what that means is that, you know, traffickers feel that they are able to essentially go back and forth and do whatever they want. You know, it's kind of the Wild Wild West of human trafficking, if you will. And then there was a resolution passed earlier this year, which essentially opened the borders, the Central African region borders, so that, well, in the name of trade, right? So they're like, let's open up the borders so that we're able to do trade back and forth so that, you know, people aren't essentially held back in doing trade. But the trickle effect of that is that the borders are not porous, and so traffickers are able to, you know, go back and forth and engage in the activity. So our relationship with Gabon, we actually reached out to the Gabonese government, you know, because you know, we think that in trying to tackle an issue such as human trafficking and youth trafficking, we're only, you know, we're postured really well when we reach out to the government. And it's been somewhat of a struggle for us to really get them to move on the issue of youth trafficking. And really what we are trying to do in Gabon is similar to what, you know, we're trying to do in Nigeria, which is really to get the data, right? And we plan on using the data to move the government to change. So like, you know, for instance, it's like if I say, Walla, give me $100 so that I can, you know, use you to buy shoes, you would want to know, well, how many shoes, what kind of shoes, and what, you know, that's data right there. And so the fact of the matter is in Gabon, for instance, 65% of its population, it has, I think, about 1.6 million people. 65% of its population is young people, 0 to 24. Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, that's another thing that, you know, the government of Gabon needs to look at. But in Gabon, the work we're trying to do, like I said, is to gather the data as it relates to how many young people have been trafficked. Say, for instance, in the past 5 years, what has the community done about it? And what are some changes that need to be put into place to make sure that, you know, human trafficking, youth trafficking specifically, is not happening in Gabon?
Well, now, what do you have planned in 2015? What, you talked about a campaign that you had before in 2014. So what's your campaign in 2015?
So our initiatives in 2015 are going to focus on two things, which is the youth boot camp. So it's going to be sort of youth boot camp a la peace game, if you will, with the end result being that young people are given information about human trafficking by adult experts, and then they break into small sessions and come up with solutions, if you will, on the issue of youth trafficking, and then we compile it into a manual. We believe that that manual will have credibility amongst their peers because it's coming from young people. Right. And really the idea is to proliferate those manuals among young people, and continue the good work, from state to state, if you will. Right. So that's one initiative. And then the other initiative, which I have alluded to in my discussion with you, is the initiative on focusing on really gathering data, because we feel that getting those numbers, when I told you that 100 to 200 young people are being sex trafficked in Atlanta on a daily basis, I mean, that really moves people to want to act. So, part of our focus for next year is really gathering data to make recommendations to, nation states, the countries that we're focusing on. And, with the eye towards really helping to tackle the issue of youth trafficking. So that's what we're focusing on. And so part of what we're doing, because we're really grassroots, my background, even though I'm a lawyer, my background is in labor organizing. But I say I've been an organizer since I was a little girl, because as soon as my one birthday is ended, I'm planning the next birthday. I just love organizing, and our approach is really grassroots. And so right now we have a campaign called Give 10, Get 10. And the idea actually came from Dan Pelota. I don't know if people know him or not, but he's like a leader in the nonprofit world. And he's really focused on moving people to, push change through grassroots work, and really, fundraising to fund an idea that they want to see happen, if you will. So the Get 10, Give 10 basically is, you give 10, get 10 rather, sorry, is, I give $10 and then I forward the email to 10 of my friends and ask them to give $10. And the rationale is, I was at happy hour the other day in DC and my meal was $10. I had a cocktail and, an hors d'oeuvre, and it was about $10, right? And the issue of human trafficking and youth trafficking, I think, is worth more than $10. And so we were just being reasonable. And we're doing it over 10 Tuesdays, if you will. So we're doing it in tandem with the hashtag Giving Tuesdays that's happening. I know the actual day for Giving Tuesday is December the 2nd, but we actually started November the 18th, and we're running our Give 10, Get 10 through January 20th, so over 10 Tuesdays. So the whole idea is, it's like the rule of 10, right? You give $10, you forward it to 10 of your friends, you have 10 Tuesdays to do it. So if you're a slacker, which some of us are, hopefully within one of those Tuesdays, you'll be able to give your 10 and forward the email to 10 of your friends. So that's what we're doing. And really the idea behind, this campaign is to raise funds to fund those initiatives that we really want to spearhead in 2015.
Interesting. Now, what can we do other than the 10, give 10, get 10? What else can we do?
Well, so there's a lot you can do. One of the things that you're able to do is to call the Polaris hotline. You can, visit
what's the number for the Polaris hotline?
The number for the Polaris hotline is 1-888-373-7888. And again, that's 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text Be Free. If you see something, if it smells funny, if it looks funny, it's better to be wrong. You know what I mean? But you may be saving a life. The other thing you can do is, visit our website, follow us on Twitter.
And what's your website?
Our website is notonourwatchadvocacy.org. Again, that's notonourwatchadvocacy.org.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Abiola, for coming on our show. This has been very informative. We're going to have to do our Give 10 and Get 10, and we're going to be on your website looking for ways to eradicate human trafficking. Now, if you want to get more information on our shows, you can go to our website at www.walablegay.com, or you can email us at chatwiththelawyer@gmail.com if you have any questions or concerns. And I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you and your family. Thank you.